Good afternoon and welcome back to our symposium, Dreadness. And this afternoon, I have the distinct pleasure to host our third panel, an exciting panel that will be made of four particular scholars. Booker Rennie, in his tribute, stated to Shadow, Shadow, in his very simplicity and apparent childlike lyrics, remains a most complex artist. Unlike our numerous social commentators who comment on particular and specific events and issues of a political or socio-economic nature, Shadow contemplates natural phenomena and man's relation to the universe. It explains why his approach to most topics, poverty, pressure, friendship, honesty, jealousy, etc., all of which are titles of actual shadow calypsos, signify the tendency of all philosophers, including Shadow, to draw concrete lessons from abstract treatment of subject matter. This afternoon's panel brings together, as I mentioned, four scholars of culture and or music who will explore the diversity and complexity of form, meaning, and representation in the structure and style of Shadow's music. Our first presenter, Mr. Khion De Las, holds a bachelor's in musical arts from the University of the West Indies. He also holds a Master of Music degree from Northern Illinois University. Mr. De Las is an instructor in music at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine here in Trinidad. He will present a paper entitled The Major Shadow of the Minor, Winston Shadow Bailey, Music, Modes, and Trinbagonian Attitudes Toward Prevalent Social Issues. It has long been accepted in music that the major mode and minor mode each generally evoke certain feelings or emotions. The major mode is often interpreted as sounding bright, clear, and sweet. It is more readily associated with the expressions of triumph, joy, celebration, hopefulness, and strength. The minor mode, on the other hand, can be categorized as sounding dark, tumultuous, and bitter. It is more readily associated with expressions of doubt, sorrow, grief, strife, mystery, and depression. The Mighty Shadow's unique style of blending social commentary with feel-good party lyrics is often equally mirrored by both the blending and alternating of the major and minor modes. Mr. De Las will interpret Shadow's use of this technique as a reflection of popular Trinbagonian attitudes towards pressing social issues. Mr. De Las, the floor is yours.
All right, pleasant good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for that introduction, Mr. Samad. And it's such a pleasure being here. Let me just organize my screen sharing. All protocols observed, and once again, a distinct pleasure being a part of this panel. So as mentioned before, my paper presentation this afternoon is The Major Shadow of the Minor, and Winston Shadow Bailey, Music Modes and Trinbagonian Attitudes Toward Prevalent Social Issues. Now, I chose this topic, as you saw, the major shadow of the minor, as a play on words, because I would be addressing and looking at the major and minor modes in music, of course, the music of the Mighty Shadow. Now, just for ease of reference, before I begin my presentation, I would like to play what the major chord, major mode may sound like, or would sound like. This is what the minor mode would sound like. Just to allow those present some sort of reference when we speak about the major and minor modes. Now, the effect of the major and minor modes, the effect of the modes on its listeners. It has been long accepted that major and minor modes in music may evoke certain feelings amongst or emotions amongst its listeners, the listeners of music. And in earlier periods or earlier studies, such as by Henver, it would have been noted that the major mode is often interpreted as sounding bright or clear and sweet, versus the minor mode sounding or being interpreted as dark or tumultuous or representing some sort of solemn nature in whatever may be expressed in the music. However, in recent times, recent studies have sort of changed or moved away from that school of thought. Now, Straley and Loback in this paper entitled The Influence of Mode and Musical Experience on the Attribution of Emotions to Melodic Sequences, they discovered that music is interpreted differently by persons who may have some music knowledge versus persons who may not have any knowledge in music. And the emotions evoked or expressed by the listeners, the consumers of the music, may vary quite a bit, whether being major or minor. The expressions gained from using the major mode may be different from a person who is experienced in music to a person who doesn't have music knowledge, how they would experience the major mode or the minor mode. So the new school of thought is that it is not set in stone how it may be interpreted by the listeners. Now, in my presentation, I'll be looking at Shadow's musical approach towards the Trinbagonian attitude. And when I say the Trinbagonian attitude, I'm speaking about the Trinbagonian attitude towards prevalent social issues. How, quite anecdotally, Trinbagonians can take a very serious issue at hand, something that's in our face in society presently, and make light of it, whether musically, comically, in memes, or in music, as we are speaking about music, and also in how persons would consume the music. So it may be a very pressing issue in society, but very often the Trinbagonian would take this pressing issue and make light of it, make fun of it, or turn it into some sort of comical relief, which can be seen as possibly still addressing the issue, but it's just the Trinbagonian approach to it. I would be dissecting 3 songs from the Mighty Shadow, Dingole, You're Looking for Horn, and Gomangala, and paying attention to Shadow's musical approach towards this Trini attitude, and how I interpret his approach to the attitude of Trinbagonians. Now, my examples would revolve around alternating, cycling, and mixing. So the Mighty Shadow's unique style of blending and social commentary with feel-good party lyrics is often mirrored by both the alternating, the cycling, and the mixing of the major and minor modes. So when I look at the 3 songs, we look at how he does this, and I would go in more depth as to what would be the alternating, cycling, or the mixing. So let's start off with alternating, and the song of choice is Dingole. Now, in Dingole, the music goes between the major mode and the minor mode at varying intervals. The song actually begins in the minor key, as I would have here in the example.
Music sweet, music sweet. The one who invented music has got to be terrific, got to be the one who created the sun and the trees, rivers and seas.
Now at this point, Shadow is speaking and referring to music, but more so as music coming from a higher spiritual power, given to us by some higher spiritual power. And from Shadow's perspective, in my interpretation, being a musician or a person with musical knowledge, it can be interpreted that he chose to use the minor mode to represent the solemnness or the deepness of this spiritual message in the beginning of the verse. So again, this would now be attributed to previous studies, which I would have said that the minor keys would have been used to interpret emotions of, solemnness or some sort of deep message, so to speak. However, the music shifts from the beginning of the verse in the minor key to now going to the major key in the second half of the verse. And let's listen to the shift as well as the lyrics being used at this point. Oh, my apologies.
Music fills the world with happiness, plenty sweetness and togetherness. Music have no friends or enemies. Everybody put Dingole.
So here we see he alternated from the minor mode initially to the major mode. And the lyrics here are speaking about Music fills the world with happiness, sweetness, togetherness. And as stated before in previous studies, we would have said that the major mode is used to express that happiness and joy and sweetness. So it's very possible that the Mighty Shadow had chosen the major mode now to represent or to mirror the lyrics that he's singing about happiness and sweetness and joy, etc. So he alternated from the minor mode to the major mode to represent what he's speaking about, his message in the music. Now, according to Shadow in his same Dingole, there's no hindrances to music and fetting. Shadow hints at poverty or strife or persons of being of a lower class or stricken by poverty in the music when he sings, if your clothes tear up or your shoes burst up. And according to a research paper submitted to the United Nations, a report, by the United Nations in 2021, Trinidad and Tobago actually has at least 53,000 citizens who are susceptible to multidimensional poverty. So poverty, and it's very obvious that poverty is definitely something that is an issue in our society today that obviously needs to be addressed. At all times, we need to speak about the poverty in our society. Now here we have Shadow speaking about this poverty, hinting at it, saying, if your clothes tear up or if your shoes burst up. However, what's interesting to note is when he's singing about the poverty, he's actually singing this part of the music in a major key. And here I have the 1-6-2-5 chord progression in major, which is actually a very common chord progression in calypso music, and you all may have heard it before. I'll now play a demonstration. 1, 6, 2, 5, and as we hear it in calypso, in the same song, if your clothes tear up or your shoes burst up, you could still jump up when music plays. So we're in the major key here, and we are actually seeing the very common 1-6-2-5 progression, which is actually used in calypso in more feel-good or dance type calypso music. And maybe as you all are listening to it right now, you could think about what emotions it invokes in you here in that 1-6-2-5 progression. So even though he's speaking about the poverty, it's being sung across the major mode. And then he moves on to say, even if your clothes tear up or your shoes burst up, when music play, it could still dingole, which again is a reflection of the Trinbagonian attitude towards the social issues that yes, we have these things facing us, but let's have fun nonetheless. Or even if we sing about it, let's have fun and jump up and sing about it and enjoy the party while we are addressing it or speaking about it. Shadow goes on to say that you don't need a bulldozer to become a composer. Any little pot or a duck may help construct a melody. And again, this could be him referring to your status or you being well off or not being well off and still having the ability to create music or even enjoy music, consume music and enjoy it. As I would have noted before, the Trini attitude is still dancing to music in a festive manner despite the social issue being expressed in the song. And I think this is very, very common in a lot of music by the Mighty Shadow. I'll now move to You're Looking for Horn. Now here I have funny but serious but funny. And I would like to play the example first, and please pay attention to the lyrics. Listen to what the Mighty Shadow is saying, and you'll get the gist of my caption there.
You learn trick. No. You have good trick. No. You're a smart man. No. A magician. No. You're looking for horn. You're going to get horn, boy. You're looking for horn. Plenty horn, boy.
So here now, he's being serious. He's asking the boy, do you have good grades? Do you have any trade? The answer is no. Then you had to be a smart man. You had to be a magician. So now we move to the funny aspect, the comical aspect of it. And then he goes on to say, looking for horn, which could be serious or interpreted as being funny either way. Now what the music does at this point is what I refer to as cycling. cycling between back and forth more rapidly between the major mode and the minor mode. Now, in the chord cycle, there are rapid changes in the modes between the major and minor, and this could be interpreted as a mirror of the subject at hand, or the attitudes towards the subject at hand. So the lyrical content shows that Shadow is giving advice, genuine advice, serious advice, that, you know, you need to have good grades, you need to at least have a trade if you're looking to get into a marital union. And for this thing to work, this is what you need to have. But at the same time, within the same breath, he turns around and ridicules him and saying, you had to be a smart man, you had to be a magician, because if you don't have those things, then how you expect your thing to work out? You're looking for horn. You're looking for horn. So now we have the seriousness of the topic at hand, the topic being discussed, and the funniness of the topic being discussed, moving back and forth within the lyrics. And I interpret the Mighty Shadow as actually mimicking this in his music itself by cycling between the major and the minor. And I will now point out how the major and the minor is being cycled here. Now, firstly, in the melody, when he sings, you're looking for horn, that word horn is actually on the tonic note of the A minor chord. And the bass, of course, would help us solidify even more what is happening at that point. So when he sings horn, he is addressing the minor mode in his melody when he sings that note. Meanwhile, the bass is actually moving back and forth between the tonic of the minor mode. So we have the A minor mode, and the bass is playing the A minor, and then it's rapidly switching to address the relative major, which is now C major. The bass goes from A to C, and back to A, and back to C. Again, cycling between the two modes, which could very well be a reflection of what is actually being sung at the point in time. I'm going to now play the example of just the band itself so that you have a better idea of the music itself without the lyrics. And let's listen and see how the bass moves back and forth between the tonic of the minor, then to the tonic of the major. And then we pay attention to the horns and the brass section, what they are doing. So I'd like to demonstrate now beforehand so that when you listen to it, you'll have a better idea. The horn section is actually playing a motif that is built off of the A minor mode. So this is the A minor chord, and they are playing and then they now switch to a major motif, which is built on the C major. So while the C major is happening, the chords are in C major, the horns are now playing. And then they go right back to the minor. That's the type of cycling that we would hear. Let's listen to the example. Now, I know there may be musicians among us, and the interpretation of what the music is doing is definitely open for discussion. But as a musician myself, it's easy for me to interpret or analyze this music as being only in major or being only in minor, or actually how I interpret it and hear it as being cycling between the major and the minor at different points based on what each instrument is doing at any given point in time. So again, this would be the the Mighty Shadow cycling between the major and the minor to reflect what he's singing about, while simultaneously reflecting the Trinbagonian attitude towards social issues on a whole, and using his music to strengthen that point. I'll now move to Gomangala, which does mixing. So Gomangala, we would have heard in a previous panel, it refers to what people say as stay home, some magical concoction by folklore that a person gives to another person in order to make that person now attracted to the person who would have been given this concoction to them. And in Gomangala, or when somebody gets Gomangala, it's often said that the person may be confused or have mixed feelings. It's like, I didn't like this person before, but for some strange reason now I am super attracted to that person, and I can't understand why, but I kind of remember that I didn't like the person before. So it's like mixed feelings, it's a mix of emotions. And now in the music, I will point out how the Mighty Shadow actually does mixing of the major and minor modes in the music, supposedly to mimic the mixing of emotions when someone receives Gomangala. Now, I would like to point out firstly that the verse starts off in the minor mode, and to me it sounds spooky or superstitious in some nature. I would like to implore persons to think about how it makes you feel, how the music, how it interacts with your whole sense of consuming the music. Does it seem spooky to you as well? If you thought about it before, or if not, think about it now when you are listening to the music. Does it have this sort of superstitious feel? And in the verse, the Mighty Shadow is using the minor mode. And I think that he used that minor mode to evoke that sense of superstition or spookiness, or, you know, some sort of gloom, as the minor mode would have been said to be used before. The chorus now is actually more a band chorus where there isn't any lyrics being sung generally. And while the chorus is happening, the music, the instruments are doing two different things. They are mixing the major modes and the minor modes. The bass and the guitar are playing in the major mode, while the horns, the brass section, they actually remain with the minor motifs that they would have been playing in the verse, which was in the minor mode initially. So when the bass and the guitar switch, they switch to the major mode, the horns continue to drone with this minor feel, and this now is superimposed upon the major mode in the chorus. Again, I interpret this as the Mighty Shadow using his musical knowledge and prowess to mimic and represent that mixture of feelings that someone may have when they have Gomangala, as well as persons' attitudes towards the subject of Gomangala. Many people believe that it is indeed something that does happen, and simultaneously many people, these same people or other people, actually make light of the situation. This is very comedic to us Trinbagonians. It's very easy for us to laugh and say, oh boy, well, I guess some Gomangala, I guess some stay home. You know, it's very easy for us to laugh at that. So again, this is still the Mighty Shadow also mirroring this attitude, this Trinbagonian attitude, to something that may be very serious in the society at the moment. So let's take a listen with that information at hand. Let's take a listen to this and see how it makes you feel, and let's see how he mixes the major and minor modes, particularly in the chorus. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
Them people fool, you tune stupid, and when you start feeling good, you're done married. Gomangala in the sweet breath, Gomangala in your gun's head.
So the horns are still playing this mysterious sort of minor mode lines, while the bass and the guitar had already transitioned to the major mode at that point. Now, it would be remiss of me to not speak about the intent or the interpreted intent of the Mighty Shadow versus the perception of the listeners of the music. Again, I definitely interpret his use of these and employment of these techniques in his music as being intentional to reflect exactly what he's singing about, reflecting exactly what the issues are at hand, and at the same time showing how a Trinbagonian generally would approach these types of issues. They would approach it, yes, we may know it is serious, but anything serious can easily be turned into a song that is used at a fete, that we can jump up to in a calypso competition where people can go wave. their rags and their flags, and we know it's something serious that the person is singing about, but we still make light and party about it. And even in our own social discourse or having talks with friends, we laugh at certain things and make light of the situation. And the Mighty Shadow is showing that this is done, and he's doing that by using his musical prowess, particularly with the major and minor modes, whether by cycling between them, alternating at varying points, or simply just mixing them on a whole. Now, the question or further research could be done on what the perception is, the perception of the listeners. Are we feeling what the Mighty Shadow is doing with his music? And then are we musicians or with some kind of musical knowledge to actually perceive it as that? Or are we without musical knowledge, but yet still we do perceive it as that? Or is it that we perceive it as something completely different? It's definitely worth, surveying and looking further to see what the perception would be to the consumers of his music. Now, I'd like to end my presentation with leaving this thesis statement to be explored at another point. Is it that what the Mighty Shadow is doing, not only does he employ the technique to reflect the attitudes, but actually his music can be considered to actually further fuel the existing culture in Trinidad and Tobago towards these social issues? Because it's not that he's saying that it shouldn't be like that, he's reflecting it, and then it kind of becomes, even more commonplace. So maybe his music can be added to that fire of this existing attitude that we may have. I'd like to leave you all with this. Whether you understand the differences between the major and the minor modes or not, be a musician, non-musician, what's more important is how the music makes you feel. So even after my presentation, if you do decide to go and listen to the music with your own listening ear, think about how it would make you feel when you listen to it, and if it does reflect what the Mighty Shadow may have been doing, as I interpret in his music. Whether you have the knowledge or not, how it makes you feel is more important, because in the words of the Mighty Shadow, everybody could dingoli. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Las, for that very thought-provoking and engaging presentation. Next on our panel, we have Dr. Kela Francis. Dr. Kela Nnarka Francis, Assistant Professor at the University of Trinidad and Tobago, earned her PhD in Caribbean Literature from Howard University in 2012, and continues to research topics in Caribbean literature, culture, and society, with particular focus on secular rituals in the Caribbean and the wider African diaspora. Her paper today, entitled Yoruba Concept of Cool and the Oxymoronic Philosophy of Dreadness. Trinbagonians have an ability to laugh in the midst of tragedy, as we heard Mr. De Las talking about it. This penchant extends into our art and communication style. This trait draws from our African cultural heritage. It exists in many guises in the diaspora, in musical forms like the blues. In particular, our paradoxical ability to see the seriousness of a situation while we laugh can be linked to the Yoruba concept of cool. Dr. Francis, tell us more about it.
Afternoon, everybody. Computers being what they are, this was set up in advance and then decided not to set itself up. Okay. So I always like to start by outlining my positionality, that I am a Pan-Africanist, communalist feminist, and that I am actively looking at ways of decolonizing academia by using non-European concepts as analytical tools. That being said, today I want to look at Shadow's dread philosophy of life and living as an extension of the Yoruba concept of cool, which teaches us that despite the ugly prettiness of life, we must remain balanced and generous. So the Yoruba concept of mystic coolness, itutu, can be loosely translated as the ability to remain calm. Itutu is derived from your development of good character, Iwariri, and is expressed in our ability to be generous and calm in the face of adversity. Your Iwariri is developed, as Robert Farris Thompson documents in Flash of the Spirit, by balancing physical beauty with everlastingness. In Yoruba aesthetics, physical beauty is neither too pretty or too ugly, short or tall, thin or fat, and so on. Instead, beauty is achieved through balance, the presence of both good, quote unquote, and bad. Everlastingness refers to Ashi, the ability to make things happen. Balance, therefore, underpins your approach to life and its vagaries. It gives us the ability to live well despite hardships. You remain mystically cool. You have Itutu. Iwariri shows up in Shadow's works in two ways: contemplations on the nature of life and the nature of living. First, the nature of life is explored in songs like My Belief.
For I believe in the stars in the dark night. I believe in the sun in the daylight. I believe in the little children. I believe in life and its problems.
And I start here because the song is an affirmation. So the verses assert Shadow's refusal to abandon convictions in the face of abuse and injustice. These convictions are declared in the chorus. The first three lines are outline affirmations. So I believe in the stars in the night sky, which speaks of the immovable beauty of the universe beyond man influence. It also has that oxymoron between darkness that we associate with fear and beauty, the shining of the stars. The sun in the daytime affirms that there is strength and power beyond man's striving. The little children symbolize innocence, potential, and continuity. And then the fourth line seems to be an oxymoron. I believe in life and its problems. However, through the lens of Itutu, this is not contradictory at all. Rather, life is supposed to have problems, conflicts, and struggles to be beautiful. This is reiterated in the story of life.
You grow up, you fall down and bounce your head. If you're dead, you don't even know you're dead. What is life?
Life is both ugly and pretty. And while this may seem upsetting, this is the natural state of things because no matter what you do, you will die. However, as the song progresses, life is revealed to be a cycle in which your death has equal value by supporting the continuation of life and nature. One day you are eating the shark, one day the worms are eating you. We can also look at Shadow's exploration of the nature of living as expressing Iwariri and Itutu. For example, in Ladder of Success.
The ladder of success is situated in distress. So when you're reaching for the sky, you got to realize the only way to receive your reward, the only way to achieve is to go forward.
So just as death has value in the larger scheme of life, struggle has value. Adversity is necessary for success. So if the end result is death,
You never had something from the day you were born. You'll never have something as far as I am concerned. You know where your riches and you count your sheep, but all that you possess is 60.
and life is hard, the suggestion is that character is more important than material trappings. We should therefore focus on inner self for true success.
You need to find some happiness.
Or as Shadow says, in happiness.
The right address. You don't have to search. The
And this word crops up in many of these selections that I'm using here today, and seems to be synonymous with iwerere, itutu, and success. It is something that is internal. It is something that you can work on despite external conditions, problems, and issues. Once we focus on iwerere, we must express itutu as Shadow admonishes us and live a generous life. First, generosity is the key to a satisfactory life. For example,
you're always in war with your conscience. It's squeezing you up like a tight pants. You could be living in a den of luxury, yet you're always unhappy.
So here, doing good is being generous with others, while bad is the opposite, represented by the accumulation of material things, possibly at the expense of others. We also need to be generous with ourselves.
They want every object they behold. Their greediness is out of control. They could be living in the midst of happiness, but their minds are in sadness.
So both clips from verse 1 and verse 2 are talking about people who either commit ungenerous acts to others to acquire goods, or are dissatisfied with where they are and what they have, and are always seeking external sources of happiness. But in either case, those who seek happiness in possessions and external markers find no rest. As the verse talks about, you lie down to sleep in your soft, nice mattress, but you're tossing and turning all night, either from being ungenerous to others or even ungenerous to yourself. Likewise, in Do What You Got to Do, and unfortunately I don't have the music for this, in 2008, we are urged to remember that everyone has his or her place in the grand scheme of life. So in Do What You Gotta Do, where he talks about everybody wants to be rich, everybody wants to be in the ruling class. But if everybody is in the ruling class, who's going to do the things that actually keep life moving forward? Who's going to farm? Who's going to clean up? Who's going to ensure that the city can run like it's supposed to run? And while this might seem, again, like an oxymoron, the idea is that we all have a role to play in the communal existence, and we should, focus on that rather than maybe striving to be something we don't necessarily need to be happy. Happiness is inside of you. Being generous with ourselves, then, should help us be generous of spirit. This is expressed in everybody is somebody.
An empty pocket makes one sad. A loaded wallet makes one glad. Listen carefully. If you are the one who is feeling glad, remember that someone who is sad is somebody.
This song overturns colonial capitalist hegemony that insists that people's worth are determined by the contents of their pockets. Instead, it urges us to be generous of spirit and remember our interconnectedness. Everybody is somebody. This is further expressed in One Love.
I would like to see the day when love would come to stay. One love, it would be happiness to see such a unity. One love, hey.
And here you see happiness, togetherness, and peace are all fruits of generosity, of that mystic coolness, itutu. If we apply to mystic coolness as an analytical lens, what overall message can we extract from Shadow's Dreadness? First, cultivate your iwariri by internalizing the aesthetic of balance and ashe, so that you can express your itutu, your mystic coolness, through generosity and coolness in the face of adversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Francis, for that very riveting, thought-provoking, and maybe even controversial presentation, you know, presenting the contradictions between, as you call it, the colonial capitalist hegemony and the many ideas that were presented by the mighty Shadow in his music. Thank you so much for your presentation. Our third presentation this afternoon is by Miss Lynn Parks. She's a documentary filmmaker from Trinidad and Tobago. She's studying cultural studies at the University of the West Indies and is interested in making documentaries about Caribbean society. Her paper this afternoon, entitled Shadow Real Dread, a discussion of the mighty Shadow's Dreadness aesthetic, caught on video. The mighty Shadow had always held a unique approach to creating and performing calypso music in the Caribbean, with his legacy leaving a lasting impact on the popular music scene in Trinidad and Tobago. Part of this legacy is described as having a certain kind of dreadness aesthetic. While this dreadness remains a nebulous concept at best, it is integral to his unique musical styling, distinct choreography, intricate lyrical techniques, and iconic fashion sense. This visual presentation will bring together subject matter experts in the field of music, dance, fashion, and literature to critically discuss Shadow's dreadness aesthetic in popular song performances. Ms. Potts, the floor is yours.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lynn Parks. I am a documentary filmmaker and based in Trinidad and Tobago. And it was a very interesting experience. So for the entire day so far, you have been seeing my documentary shorts about the mighty Shadow being played intermittently throughout the entire conference. And these are the documentaries that I'm going to be discussing today for my presentation. And it's always interesting, as a documentary filmmaker, a lot goes into this idea of context. So being able to explain and express exactly, you know, why I decided to create these films, how I went about creating these films, and what do I think resulted from these documentaries is a very interesting point. And that's what, you know, I'm really going to discuss. So these films, in total, they came out to 5 short films, were created with the express intent for this conference. I challenged myself doing these documentaries to better understand, you know, the mighty Shadow, the legend and the icon, as well as this concept of his dreadness. And for me, it really came across as a very fluid and nebulous concept. And today we've heard, you know, different people have different interpretations of what is it to be dread, what was Shadow's interpretation of dreadness. And I started this project with, you know, a fairly close understanding of maybe what it could be. But when it comes to filmmaking, especially documentary filmmaking, whatever we plan or we intend at the beginning or what we believe we know often tends to go awry when we actually begin the process of researching and recording and capturing exactly what our topic is and, you know, who the mighty Shadow is. So it was very much difficult for me to bring across a nebulous concept to a tangible medium like film. So To Be Dread had different interpretations by different groups of people, different spaces, places, and cultures. But at the end of the day, I had to be able to visualize this on screen. And this was an extremely, you know, intimidating task for me. And it was almost insurmountable at certain times throughout the production. Because the way in which I grew up, looking at Shadow and understanding who he was a very much intimidating figure coming up as a child. He was always dressed in black, despite the fact that he would perform different songs that had different tones, cadence, and meanings. As a child, it was always seen as someone that was a bit foreboding, menacing, and fearful. So coming into with these feelings as a child and how to do this documentary as an adult, I was also very intimidated by accurately interpreting his legacy. Now, filmmaking in itself, just like Shadow, is confrontational. So despite the fact that, I felt I had these feelings of intimidation and, dread, I did have to basically confront this idea, confront my fears and confront this image of Shadow if I wanted to wrangle and fight with his legacy and bring it to screen. So as a documentary filmmaker, we are often tasked with becoming, subject matter experts about people or different topics that we are documenting. So in my reflection on this, thinking back is like, I do ask myself, did I become an expert? Do I know enough about Shadow from making these films? And it really is a conversation of, well, no. These documentary shorts were broken up in an attempt for me to deconstruct and understand who he is in order to bring him back together. So looking at each topic, I chose different people to be able to talk to different aspects about who he is, who Shadow was, and what he was able to do at the time he was with us in Trinidad and Tobago. So questions that I brought up was, basically starting from ground zero. Who is Shadow? And who can I choose to explain who he was and what he was able to do? Now, selecting the actual subjects who were going to speak on his behalf was, just chosen through what we call a snowball method. We started with a central person within the university, and I went outwards from there. I asked for different recommendations as to who can speak to him and speak to the different aspects of his dreadness. And it really turned out to be an interesting project. So I narrowed it down to 4 themes, looking at his lyrics, his music, his style in terms of his dress, as well as his performance. The persons that, I was suggested to speak to was John Arnold, Hazel Franco for dance, Dr. Geraldine Skeet for literature and lyrics, as well as Omari Ashby for fashion. And it was very interesting having a conversation because as I continued to talk to them and interact with them before we even started the camera rolling, I began to understand, well, this isn't really a topic that's going to be speaking from the point of view of his fans, persons who adored him, persons who really felt that connection, people who understood, lived his lyrics and, really interpreted it and applied it to their lives. So focusing on these different persons was an interesting way in which I constructed a different aspect of his dreadness, really from the position and the point of view of his fandom. So the subjects themselves were definitely experts in talking about the different themes that I brought up within the film. And each one of them brought something very unique to the interpreting from their perspective and their understanding of Shadow. And they were then able to translate this and, generally communicate to each other. And then I was able to bring it together into a very strong conversation about Shadow. So the first person that we looked at was John Arnold. Now, my team and I, which was made up of myself and 2 other crew members, Miss Daria Allard and Miss Letitia Leslie, we basically did a lot of brainstorming in terms of how to approach John Arnold and how to get his conversation and his love and his admiration for Shadow outwards. And in terms of his documentary short, I'm going to show you guys a clip. It's interesting to look at John and understand who he is because working with Shadow gave John a completely different perspective and insight into who Shadow was as a person, as a performer. So I'm just going to show a clip. Share screen. All right. So when it came to speaking with John Arnold, we started off our journey. He was the first person we interviewed, and it was very telling that we made a journey into Tobago to start a documentary about shadow. While we were in Tobago, before even we began the interview, we did a drive through like a tour within Tobago just to get a sense of where the space that really influenced and built shadow up as a particular performer and entertainer. So we returned to Mount Irving Beach Resort to speak with John Arnold about his musical stylings. And it's just interesting that I chose a particular clip that stands out in terms of his interpretation of shadow.
A poor man living when he had children hungry, nothing in the pot. He come by the neighbor to beg for some rice. The neighbor under pressure.
Shadow always saw himself as Mr. Different. He was different. And he was adamant about what he wanted.
Music in itself was a well-engineered piece of recording. So beautifully done. And the strings and the voice, your voice meshed in so beautifully within that production. I mean, it made my heart feel so good.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful feeling. The first part of the feeling, I would play my guitar and I feel the thing nice, you understand? So when I sit down with, it was like the same Thomas and a guy named Neil, he was working with the computer. And we just working and getting there. And another one, Andrew, just come in time and play a crazy piece of string. I say, well, yes. Don't move. You play that, right? I just play that and get out. And that was it.
The whole thing about the dreadness of him had to do with that confidence he had in his unique ability to be so unique, right? I think that's a nice way to put it. That he had this confidence that he was unique and that nobody could move him away from that.
She had me head in pain, me house like Lover's Lane, since she come down to Port of Spain. I come from work, I tired and hungry. I hearing in my bedroom, don't bite me. I bust the door like a ape. I see a man trying to escape. When they hear shadow come, the fella jump out and gone. Leave Dorothy scrambling. To hide the food he was eating, she trying to hide it quick. I snatch up a fat boomstick. It's only the rice she get to hide. I catch you with all this saltfish outside.
Right. So in terms of, the way in which we had to talk, the way in which John interpreted his dreadness, as being very forceful, as being, standing up for himself, because we all have heard in the previous presentations, the fact that Shadow came in a lot of fisticuffs with judges and the Calypso authorities of the day. So it was very interesting, getting that particular interpretation from John, because while it did sound like a very important issue when I was doing my research, it was very humorous, especially for the point of view of fans, because they expected this type of confrontation. It was almost as though they wanted to interpret and emulate the behaviors of Shadow, because he was the underdog, the wronged man. And this really comes out in terms of John's interview and the way in which he remembers and talks about Shadow. So this interpretation is one of my first understandings. Well, this is dreadness. It is, yes, to stand up and be prolific and stand up for yourself, but it's also to do so with the admiration of others who can understand, well, why you are doing this. And this is where, it led me into my second point, where every single one of the interviewees described Shadow as, a sage, a griot, and a philosopher. He gave advice, not just through his music, but in terms of his mannerisms, his performance, in terms of how we should be within society, how we should present ourselves and deal with different issues. So the other clip that really brings this particularly interesting point out would be in terms of Omari. Sorry.
killer. He had this command of the underworld, that kind of stuff. And that was because when Shadow entered, Shadow was entering in the time of the dominance of Kitchener and Sparrow. You know, every road march was Kitchener or Sparrow, everybody. So he had to now make this entryway into this art form and make a noise. And when he did, he thought he wasn't being treated fairly. He thought he was he was being overlooked. He thought that the judges wasn't taking him on, and so he did what almost every society in this what they call the Western world, where you have that diasporic inclination to, all right, so I bad, but let me lean into that. You know, it's the idea of the Jab Malassi, I'm black, and black is bad. Well, I blacker than black, and I'm going to be dreader than dread until you understand, you know, that I am this. You know, I am the ultimate person.
And this particular point that, you know, Omari makes in terms of how he was admired, especially by his fans, and, you know, leaning into this idea of being Shadow, this dreadness, and being very intimidating to people. Quite a lot of people, especially in terms of the interviews, as well as other persons that we talked to, very much admired the way in which Shadow presented himself. This is where the philosophical sage-like interpretation of his persona, his dreadness, came in. So for us, between, you know, listening to John and listening to Omari, we got the understanding that, you know, dreadness may not exactly be this interpretation that we were seeing in the different theses that have been written over the years about Shadow, in terms of him being, you know, intimidating or menacing. It, to some extent, his dreadness was inspirational, because at no point in our discussions and our investigations and creation of this documentary were people ever truly, you know, afraid of him. It was very much an admiration. So with this idea of admiration in mind, we then turn to the ways in which, how do we begin to emulate visually how people feel about Shadow, how people, this nostalgia, this, you know, belief within him. And that proved to be a very, like, the extremely linchpin of the issue. Because with this particular one, it comes back to the idea of Stuart Hall, in terms of how do we represent someone while people are speaking and representing on behalf of him. So we obviously turn to archival footage. And you can see it within my documentaries, it's littered with so much archival footage. But, you know, these are limitations in terms of how they construct a parallel idea of dreadness. These archives are also locked and set within a time period that I have to now create a context for. So even looking at these and reflecting on the documentary works that I did today, I realized that, you know, I just basically scratched the surface on this idea of who Shadow is using this particular media. I took him in terms of different spaces and I broke him up to deconstruct him, but I have not even begun to put him back together. And this is going to be an ongoing task, because this is what the documentary has revealed. In terms of, I need a lot more understanding, a lot more context in terms of who Shadow is, and not just that, but how his fans interpret it. How does the archives, you know, present and represent this idea of the mighty Shadow? Now, this leads me into my final point, because this is more of like a conversation of what was done. This is going to be the beginning, you know, of an entire Calypso series based around these artists and the indelible mark that they have left on Trinidad and Tobago society and culture. This definitely requires a further deeper dive into who Shadow is and who Shadow was and what his dreadness not just only meant to him, but how it has been interpreted by different generations within Trinidad and Tobago society, as well as our diaspora. So it's just to wrap up and say, very much this documentary did give us a lot of insight into who he is, but it just only scratched the surface, despite the fact that in its entirety, the documentary comes up to about 45 minutes. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation for today. So this is the interpretation of Shadow's Dreadness, caught on film using a documentary lens. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, for that presentation, which really highlighted to us, the complex and confrontational process of making documentaries. It's not an easy feat at all, and we thank you for your insights regarding that. Our final presentation in today's third panel is by Dr. Megan Sylvester. Dr. Sylvester is a published author from the Caribbean twin island of Trinidad and Tobago. She is a UB St. Augustine graduate and a Caribbean scholar whose doctoral research focused on narratives of resistance in calypso and raga soca music. Her continuing interrogation within the Academy centers on music, gender, and national identity in calypso and soca, music of the diaspora carnivals, music and human rights, and steel pan and Kaiso jazz musical identities. Teaching and research interests of hers are Caribbean music cultures and African diaspora popular culture. Her paper this afternoon is entitled Analyzing Personal, Collective, and Cultural Memory in the Lyrical Content of Shadow's Calypsos. Through a review of some of the main themes and lyrics in the Calypsos of Shadow, this paper will demonstrate how he used personal memory, collective memory, and cultural memory to constantly reinterpret and reimagine nostalgia of his childhood home, Tobago, while simultaneously addressing the economic and social issues affecting Trinbagonian society. In this work, emphasis will be placed on the scholarship of Locke to analyze personal memory, which will be underscored as the memory we have of particular items, people, places, things, events, situations that we have personally experienced. Collective memory will be operationalized using the theory of Halberts, who opines that collective memory could be shared, passed on, and constructed by large and small groups. And Schwartz, who refers to it as the distribution throughout society of beliefs, feelings, moral judgments, and knowledge about the past. Dr. Sylvester, welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm just going to share my presentation. A slight change to the title in terms of understanding what we're looking at. I'm going to be looking at memorializing the mighty shadow, personal, collective, and cultural memory in Calypso. And of course, I'm going to be focusing on the work of the mighty shadow. And in particular, I just want to focus on the fact that several scholars of Caribbean popular culture contend that Calypso music is a form of social and political expression. Towards this end, they have identified historical memory and chronicle of current events as the primary function of this musical genre. Using this analysis as a frame of reference, this paper is really going to be focusing on memorializing Calypsonians and the Calypso art form, and of course, focusing on Shadow, who would have left us earlier in 2018. His work over the 40-odd years has explained life lessons to the themes of poverty and pressure and friendship, honesty, jealousy, survival, truth, human rights, and it goes on. And through an examination of his essential themes, this work will examine how we can use personal, collective, and cultural memory to reinterpret and reimagine Shadow's lyrics as they speak to modern-day issues affecting Trinbagonian society. And so I just want to touch on understanding music as personal, collective, and cultural memory to start. Music has been seen to be a means for the transmittance of personal, collective, and cultural memory of one generation to the next, where new memories are forged and formed in the process. Several sociological scholars have addressed the concept of personal, collective, and cultural memory in popular music, and they are listed there as evidence in the research. I just want to touch on some of the scholars that we're speaking about. Olson, 2004, references the Nikkei people in South America, where music became a learning tool, prompting memories in ways that contributed to identity formation. So that's what we're going to be looking for when we speak to the music of Shadow. Sturgeon, in 1997, memory establishes life's continuity, and it gives meaning to the present, as each moment is constituted by the past. As the means by which we remember who we are, memory provides the very core of identity. And when we speak to what is collective memory, Stokes 1997 indicates how music can be a tool for evoking and organizing intense collective memories, more intense than most other social activities. Olick in 2008 opines that all individual remembering takes place with social materials within social context and in response to social cues. Cultural memory in particular, according to Holbach, Warburg, and Assmann in 1995, posit that memory is more than a biological construct and see it as a societal activity. Assmann goes on in 1995 to mention or theorize that our memories are founded upon the existence of others. And so it is getting into that kind of discussion about what is personal, collective, and cultural memory that I want to now use Calypso as this art form to introduce this concept. For Calypso music, the application and analysis of personal, collective, and cultural memory has had to consider and contend with hegemonic narratives of perception about this Afro-Caribbean musical genre, which demonstrates traceable influence, sonic complexity, and social and political meaning and awareness. So that becomes important for us to understand. I just want to do a little bit of...
Sylvester?
Yes?
Can you make your slides full screen? Some of the participants are not seeing it.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. Okay, I'm not too sure I can do it within the presentation itself.
Once you share it,
okay, sure, no problem. Yeah, there's that on the top there.
Down to the bottom in the left-hand corner. There's a little thing.
Is it here?
Yes, down to the bottom, you'll see something looking like a little screen.
Am I there? I'm not sure. Are you all seeing that?
I'm not seeing your mouse. Or to the top of the screen, you'll see like a circle with a triangle in front of it.
I know, but it's being blocked by okay, there it is. Yes. I think this should make a difference now. Yes.
That's better, thank you.
Much better? Okay. So, as I was indicating, I had just gone through understanding Calypso as memory. And now what we're really going to be doing is just touching on Calypso itself. For Calypso music, the first known recording would have been in 1912 in terms of understanding from the Lovey's band. And this now sort of situates the whole concept of memory and in understanding the Calypso art form as being part of what we know as part of our history and culture. Historically contextualizing Calypso and its relationship to Carnival, we have Carol Boyce Davies asserting in 1985 that Calypso music has become an integral part of the annual Carnival festivities. Again, getting to that whole understanding of memory and what Carnival and Calypso means. This perspective of Davies marries with the viewpoint of Giuseppe Sofo in his 2014 article entitled Carnival, Memory and Identity. Again, getting to that theme of identity, understanding the link to memory, in which he makes linkages between the culture of Trinidad, the event of Carnival, and the identity of the people. The Carnival of Trinidad is a performative ritual of cultural resistance and awakening, claiming a space and celebrating freedom from any kind of oppression. The history of this ritual is strictly connected to the process of cultural decolonization and political independence, all a part of our history, all a part of our memory of understanding who and what Trinidad and Tobago is. All right? And it is in Carnival and for Carnival that Trinidadians have successfully fought colonialism to gain their freedom. For Sofo, like Davies and Liverpool, this is Hollis Liverpool in particular, Carnival and its accompanying Calypso music are inextricably interwoven and are tied to the identity of the Afro-Trinidadian. And now I want to get specifically to this link between shadow and personal memory, shadow and collective memory, and shadow and cultural memory. Anti-hero, personal identity. When Shadow's bassman hit and put himself under the influence of Farrell, the bassman from hell, he did something that nobody else had done, challenging the Catholic roots of the Festival of Carnival itself and aligning himself with the dark. He accepted the label of Calypso being bad, devil, evil, carnal, while proving in music that it was good, sweet, and irresistible. And many persons have spoken about this sweetness in Shadow's music. He further solidified his persona as the Dark Lord of soca with songs like Obia, and his costuming, which many have referred to earlier today, but all black or black with skeletons. And I will be focusing on that song later on in the presentation, Obia, to look at what we're talking about. Here's a visual of how Shadow now demonstrates who he sees himself as, the link to Obia and his understanding of what would have happened in his early years, and how this brought to bear on his questioning of himself and how we indeed would see him. Looking now at collective memory, Shadow brought the bass. He was the bass man. He also provided antithesis of what performing was. He was not a crooner like Duke nor a dancer like Sparrow, but his signature style of standing in one spot, right, which I think is an important gimmick, gave rise to other persons inventing other gimmicks in their acts. In the ongoing debate of the Calypsonian versus Calypso singer, he came down on the side of the Calypsonian who composes and writes and plays music. My reference to this song, of course, is Dingole when we see him on the stage. And of course, as well, this video has been played before in today's presentations and we understand it, but I will share a little bit of it. But here we see another visual of Shadow using his body to evoke that sense of this understanding collectively as Trinbagonians and Trinidadians about exactly who we are being demonstrated in his own performance. The Calypsonian on stage, what does he represent? We also see on the right-hand side of the screen this concept of the zest man. And we know throughout Trinidad and Tobago culture, we have seen this kind of persona being evoked. You know, we think of Lord Shorty, etc., coming down in other performers today. When we think of Shadow and cultural memory, we see, if we do a juxtaposition of Shadow and David Rudder, we see he's the antithesis of Rudder. What Rudder does lyrically is tending to be verbose. However, he packs a lot of words, a lot of prose into life. Shadow, on the other hand, usually practices an economy of words, using imagery and metaphor to pull the final impression from the mind of the listener. Example, cook curry or crow, talking to animals, talking a sort of animal farm of soca. Another song which has been referenced today already, we talk about poverty is hell, and it puts you perfectly in the shoes of someone that does not have. And this again is another unintended contribution that Shadow made in paving or improving that an artist could be viable without, in particular, being this, you know, crowned king within the Calypso art form. I think of musical accompaniment, cook curry okro, and poverty is hell. And we also go on to talk about cultural memory in terms of what I think is one of his best known lines, or one of the best known lines in Calypso. I was planning to forget Calypso to go and plant peas in Tobago. It seems Tobago is never far from his mind. Again, personal memory even being intermixed with the collective memory of who Tobago is, as well as cultural memory. All right, in songs like Pay the Devil, Pack Pack. Long ago in Tobago, the carnival wasn't so, was plenty jab jab and devil. They came down to Lake Koto. They came from Culloden horns on the head. This song chronicles people, places, and traditions of long-time Tobago carnival. More so, many songs seem to chronicle the pastoral life of old Tobago in the language of the land. And that is also important in Shadow's work. You can imagine, you can walk through with him exactly what his personal memory is of his homeland and how that brings to bear about a collective understanding as Trinbagonians of what he is really trying to bring across to us. When he speaks about neighbor Willie in the garden want water, and he speaks about cook curry or crow and donkey days of the donkey, it's an allegory of life, folklore, and so much more. When Tan Tan, chronicles of marital, issues, and then you have gossip and intrigue at its best, etc. He is really a beautiful storyteller, and his works often are beautiful time capsules of the people and places of his day. And this is how we really get a sense of what is the culture of Tobago, what is the culture of Trinidad. He brings it to bear in his music. So when we address themes in the music, we really understand what we're dealing with. And of course, my musical accompaniment would be Pay the Devil and the Garden Want Water. And that becomes important for us to understand. Now I want to just play some music for us to really understand what we'll be dealing with here in terms of this. In terms of, are you all still seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Is this still sharing here? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Obia.
Not hearing anything though, so you may have to
Okay.
stop sharing and then make sure you click
Okay.
the sound button.
All right. Sure. Okay. Okay. I think that there is a challenge because I would have gone to the presentation and I would have had the. I'm trying to stop sharing, but I'm not getting the prompt to stop sharing. So I don't know if you can do it on your end. I'm having a challenge coming out of the presentation. I'm not too sure. I'm not seeing the Zoom link to stop sharing. Can anyone assist? I'm not too sure what's happening. Similarly, you set up all of these things, and then when you have to do a presentation, there's a little bit of a glitch. I'm not too sure what's happening.
I think if you press this share screen at the bottom, it should give you an option to stop sharing.
I'm not seeing it at the bottom because I think I would have disabled the.
Okay.
There it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Are you? Yes. Are you seeing anything there?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. I'm not too sure what these technical glitches are. The share is on. The share sound is on. I'm going to attempt that again. Tell me if anyone is hearing now. Yes. So this is Obia looking at the whole issue of personal memory.
Name for the right. Accusing me. Yes, seriously. He said he feel that I don't feel. I asked him why. He tell him lie. He say you singing nonsense, but people love your nonsense. It's Obia. You walking Obia. You looking like a boo-boo, but yet the sister love you. It's Obia. You walking Obia. Obia man, answer the question. Obia man, you are not dealing with Satan.
So this is an important song, I think, as we look at the whole issue of we're talking about memory and who are we in Trinidad and Tobago. This is a part of our culture. It's a part of who we are. And I'm submitting that there's an intermingling of the whole concept of the personal, collective, and cultural memory in Shadow's music. Now, this is a song, of course, it's been played many times today. It has been referenced many times, but I'm just playing it to emphasize his stage performance and this understanding of who this Calypsonian is in terms of our collective memory of the art form.
Do you think any of us will look back in our lives and regret the things we didn't buy?
So we get an immediate visual of who Shadow is, how he sees his stage performance, and what he wants to evoke. It becomes a theme in terms of the presentation of the Calypsonian on the stage and how other persons have used this gimmick as part of the memory of Calypso performance. Pay the Devil now speaking to the whole issue of collective memory and cultural memory.
Long ago in Tobago, the carnival wasn't so no. Was plenty jab and devil. They came down to let it go. They came from Colorado, horns on their head. One name is Jackson, eyes all raised red. One Abyssinia, a hero of man, portraying Lucifer with a fork in his hand.
Cultural and collective memory. Again, this song now to reference an understanding of what we're talking about.
This is Caribbean Vibes.
One day on the farmer's farm, I rode the farmer's hand. I was standing standing very calm, and then I listen again. I heard the farmer's hen rapping to the farmer's cock. She was talking English then, and I was very shocked. She shouted, cock, 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 mele, mele. The cock on the farm demonstrating he charm the hen in alarm, but he don't care a damn. Cock, 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 mele, mele. The farmer ran out searching for the nest. The cock shouted out loud in protest, Cook-curry-o-crow!
Bringing us back to the traditions that are part of our culture, and this being imbibed in Shadow's music. And finally, just speaking to this song, speaking to another aspect of our culture in terms of relationships, etc.
They say Evelyn sick, oh Lord, sick, sick. She done with a sick trick, a sick trick. She father complaining, I said stop complaining. Daddy sent she over, I know what's the matter. Neighbor Willie, the girl breathing, medicine can't do she nothing. The garden want water, the garden want water. You have the girl locked up all day, she can't even come out and play. Bumsy getting fat like butter, the girl wants some manual labor.
Okay, so it becomes important as I look at all of those songs and the importance of what we would have understood in terms of Shadow's music, looking at the whole issue of personal and collective and cultural memory. This paper's discussion on memory is theoretically grounded in Maurice Halbach's work on collective memory. By channeling his theories of the social nature of memory, this researchers place focus on how the shared memory of the calypso music, in particular Shadow's work, has helped musicians and performers create a common understanding of the world or particular aspects of the world, which allows them to recreate a similar sense of contestation against hegemonic dominance, because that is what I indicate that Shadow's music has done. Noting that Halbach's theory possesses hierarchical assumptions, which assume that the formation of memory is premised upon fixed power relations, this work deviates from that approach and instead preferences the diversity of interactions which are not fixed, but is directly responsive to the changing identity of individuals. So it becomes important as I think about what has Shadow really brought to personal, collective, and cultural memory. His music in particular, through his lyrics, have really taken us back and forward. That movement is to who we were, who we are, who we will be, being embodied in his music and lyrics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sylvester, for such an engaging presentation about memory and the interplay between personal, collective, and cultural memory. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of our panel today, but we'd like to get all panel members on the screen if possible. And if any of the attendees have any questions, in particular for our panel members, it would be great if you could put them in the chat or in the Q&A function at this moment. Give them a few seconds. In the meantime, I want to highlight and underscore that the 4 presentations presented today looked at form, meaning, and representation in the structure and style of Shadow's music from different perspectives and angles. We had Mr. De Las talking about it from the musical audio aspect, how Shadow used minor and major to alternate mix and create different messaging through to the use of minor and major chords. We had Dr. Francis talking about decolonizing and using the African concepts of Itutu and Iwarere to sort of fuse a different perspective on life, a different understanding of how we deal with life through the words of the songs, as well as just the overall conceptual framework for the songs. We had Ms. Parks talking about confronting the imagery of dreadness and blackness in Shadow's work. And lastly, of course, we had Dr. Sylvester talking about memory and how Shadow's music utilized and brought different aspects of memory together for us to have a common understanding of the world. Yeah. One of the questions I wanted to ask as we wait to see if anybody has any questions in the chat. Yes, there's one. On the matter of changing identity, is it safe to say that there was a change in Shadow's public identity as it relates to changes in costuming? I don't know who would like to take that question. I'll say it again. On the matter of changing identity, is it safe to say that there was a change in Shadow's public identity as it relates to his changes in costuming?
Name change costume.
Sheila, you want to go ahead? I see you're being prompted from your audience. I know I spoke to identity, but you can go ahead.
I think Ms. Parks is well positioned with her research to tackle this question first.
Okay, so in terms of the costuming and how it changed, based on his identity, when we looked in some of his early performances, his style and dress was, a little more glamorous because it suited the time frame. In terms of he wore a lot of more, he didn't necessarily start in black. He had a little more of a shiny material that coincided with the Calypsonians of the era. But as he evolved, and as Omari pointed out, and John Arnold pointed out, as he began to get into more tangles with the judges and the Calypso authorities and the ways in which he was treated and sort of ostracized or marginalized, that is when he really leaned in to the dreadness, as Omari interpreted. This is when he said, oh, okay, if you think I'm bad, I'm badder than bad, and I'm going to most definitely show you exactly how black I can be, how dark I could be. And around the time where he did started to wear a lot more dark colors is when a lot more people began to recognize his identity, more so than when he was seemingly blending into the Calypso fraternity. This idea of Shadow as an ominous figure, he's well over 6 feet tall, he's clad in black, and he would glide through Belmont because he would leave his home in Belmont and walk to the stage for the Mardi Gras. And, it was almost like an amazing sight to see this man clad in black, basically floating through Belmont and floating up onto the stage. So yeah, that's my interpretation of how his identity formed. It really had a lot to do with how he was being received by the Calypso fraternity, and his dress and it really did reflect how he felt and how he was treated. Thanks.
Mr. De Las, when you talked a lot about his techniques reflecting or possibly reflecting the prevailing attitudes in the space, right, in Trinidad and Tobago, and the attitude to dealing with difficulty. What do you think? Tell us a little bit more about why you think he was so able to tap into this particular skill, this technique.
Definitely, I would say at the forefront. I mean, he is Trinbagonian, so I think it's possible that it's an inherent thing. And again, his general adaptation or analysis of how is social commentary through Calypso, and of course he, as other Calypsonians, would actually have to pay attention to what is happening in the society, how people are perceiving things, and maybe he just really channeled that level of analysis of taking his time with his craft. As a Calypsonian, it's plain to see that he took his time to really analyze what is going on, or his topic that he's about to highlight. So it may be very well that he would have also paid attention to how people's attitudes were towards the topic as well, in addition to his possible own inherent attitude towards it as a Trinbagonian.
Right. Dr. Francis, your paper on the Yoruba concept of cool is quite interesting. Connected to what Mr. De Las was talking about, Shadow tapping into his Trinbagonianness. Where do you think, or how do you think he would it have been a conscious choice to kind of infuse his music with these concepts, these Yoruba concepts, or do you think it was more of a kind of like a subconscious thing?
Well, let me clarify that I'm not suggesting that use of Itutu or Iwa Ire concepts were anyway intentional or conscious or even subconscious. A lot of our culture is influenced by influx of Yoruba and Yoruba-speaking peoples after emancipation, setting up shop in Belmont. You also had, after the end of the slave trade, a lot of liberated Africans ending up in Tobago. So a lot of the cultural practices we have these philosophies underpinning them, and they tend to come out when artists, as Mr. De Las was saying, when artists start to pay attention to their craft and they start to filter this zeitgeist and create from it. So more as a tool, if you know what it is, to see what possibly is being done or to interpret what is being done. So it has a fuller picture.
Right. Yeah. And of course, that takes us to, the questions of memory that Dr. Sylvester was talking about. Because, you're saying that in his music, he was interplaying and intermingling personal, collective, and cultural memory. Is that something that you think was purposeful, that he wanted to do that, or do you think it was something that was sort of like a byproduct of him just being in this space, just being a music maker in this space? You're on mute. Sorry.
Answer that question, Sean, and it's an interesting question because in preparation for just this paper and in terms of understanding personal, collective, and cultural memory, I did a little bit of what Lynn would have done in terms of speaking to persons about who Shadow was and what was important to him. And this whole issue about was it intentional? And I think it was a combination of who he was, how he was raised, the influences that he had, and what he saw as important to him. So when you're talking about the song like Obia and talking about why that is important and why would that even be part of a topic within the Calypso art form, it comes from Shadow's understanding of I am going to represent what is. And then we look at what's happening today. And this is why I thought it was important to touch on memory, because as I spoke to persons who either worked with him, performed with him, and persons who were influenced by him, you see that today Terry Lyons has a song entitled Obia, dealing with the same issue. So you see the continuity in the art form, and you start to think now, okay, this is what the impact is. So to answer your specific question, was it intentional? I don't think it was intentional, but we see the impact. And it's because people in their subconscious, more than a biological construct, it's about societal. What were people at the time talking about when Shadow would have produced this record in terms of Obia? And all of his songs, Poverty is Hell, talking about all of the topical social issues of the day, it had an impact on the successive generations. And this is where we're able to talk about the impact of memory and how it continues in the art form as we continue and go on.
Great, thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of this panel. We have the last panel for the day, or the last convo, I should say, coming up shortly thereafter. So we encourage all attendees to stay on. We want to again thank Mr. De Las, Ms. Parks, Dr. Francis, and Dr. Sylvester for being a part of this really interesting and engaging presentation. And thank you for joining us at Dreadness.